Matthew Tkachuk gets his day with the cup, and multiple Panthers contracts are considered some of the best in the NHL. We're going to break that down more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Thursday, July 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at Monoman12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have finished, and now it's baseball season for the summer and MLS. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. So welcome back here to the show, and great to be back with you guys here to discuss once again the Summer of Champions for the Florida Panthers, and the celebration continues for the Panthers as the Stanley Cup is going around to different cities and towns all throughout North America and eventually making its way overseas. But it's still on the Western Hemisphere here for the multiple celebrations here. And the one that we just found out about when it comes to a Stanley Cup celebration day with the cup is Matthew Tkachuk. That is the latest now for celebrations and days there. So the latest with him is that he took it back to his elementary school in St. Louis. So of the photos that have surfaced around social media, his personal social media, and the school that he went to, is a elementary school for boys, but for girls, it's ages 3 all the way to 12th grade. So for Tkachuk going there, he took a picture with all the students surrounding him. It looked like it was 50 plus of them around him with the Stanley Cup. And also there's a picture of the sister, Taryn Tkachuk, pointing at her high school field hockey state championship from 2017. There aren't any photos, at least that I've seen, of the Stanley Cup going to the high school that Matthew Tkachuk went to, along with Jason Tatum. So no pictures have appeared there. And you also, with all the celebration and going around, you built up an appetite all throughout the traveling all throughout your city or town. So after all that, they also took it to a local restaurant out there in St. Louis. It's called Grassi's Ristorante. It's an Italian restaurant where even in the photo, you see him eating a sub and a salad there. Goes behind the counter and the cashier and lifts up the Stanley Cup too. You see the menu right behind it too. So that's another thing for this celebration that Matthew Tkachuk is as a part of his celebration for it. And then the party continued later on into the afternoon/evening, where video surfaced of Keith Tkachuk and Matthew pouring a drink into the mouth of Taryn Tkachuk too. So that's also a video that has surfaced there. But also another thing that I have just wondered all throughout this celebration of Matthew specifically when it comes to the Stanley Cup, even before his day with the cup, is how awkward this must be for Brady. He's around the cup, he's seeing his brother win it, but the whole rule of not touching the cup until you win it is, I'm sure, although he is happy for his brother, there's a little part of him that is just craving so much more of wanting to finally get it done for his sake, because there's no photos of him touching it, and I doubt that he has, even if things were not documented for him. So I also wonder how awkward it must be for him, where you're cheering for someone, but you also want a piece of that too. And a little bit, obviously, whenever you're, as a person who has a sibling too, there's also a lot of competition growing up in multiple, especially if you play multiple sports, especially if you're the younger one. Obviously, there's parts of your life where you're challenging your brother, and they're have a little bit of a height advantage too in certain areas when it comes to battling with them, even if it's just something silly like playing hockey in the backyard or even in street hockey too, where now you see Brady Tkachuk seeing his brother win it, and you want a little bit of a piece of that too for him. But we mentioned Matthew Tkachuk a few days ago playing golf with Tony Romo, something that Jacob and I spoke about, but we didn't really go into the why of why he was golfing with Tony Romo. And it also is tied into the party that he had with Travis Kelce, the after party that he had. And that actually happened to take place in Lake Tahoe, where the NHL actually had a few games there during the shortened season in 2022, where the Avalanche and the Vegas Golden Knights played, where they had to delay the game by, I believe it was like 6 or 7 hours due to the ice melting with trying playing a game in daylight, but the ice conditions were not the best there. But also the Philadelphia Flyers and Boston Bruins also played a game in Lake Tahoe, and the scenery was amazing. And this one was for the American Century Championship, the same tournament that Tony Romo and Travis Kelce were also a part of. So it's all tying in together of making it make sense for being in a certain location, partying, and then getting your day with the cup. We spoke about Carter Verhaeghe being at that restaurant in Isla Morada in the Keys in relation to Chris McClellan's day with the cup too. So that's putting 2 and 2 together consistently. So in the American Century Championship, the celebrity golf tournament that went on in Lake Tahoe, there's 90 participants there, and for Tkachuk, he just finished outside of the top third in the tournament out of 90. So a few of the guys who finished and part of the guy and some of the people who participated in it recently retired. Joe Pavelski, who finished second. We mentioned John Smoltz, he finished fourth a few days ago, but also a few other celebrities in different sports, and even a hockey player. One of them being John Carlson of the Washington Capitals, just finished just behind Matthew Tkachuk in that same tournament. Chandler Parsons, Florida native Chandler Parsons, was tied 44th there. TJ Oshie finished tied for 50th in that one. And also crazy situation with the Washington Capitals right now and the Carolina Hurricanes, where both of them are getting cap relief due to Evgeny Kuznetsov terminating his contract. So Washington is still over 10 million over the cap, but there's still questions on the statuses of TJ Oshie and Nicholas Backstrom for LTIR relief too. So I don't even know if TJ Oshie is going to play another game of hockey ever again. At least those have been some reports during the offseason there. Also, another, I wouldn't say South Florida legend, but another athlete who has been in the South Florida sports scene was also a part of that same tournament too. And Kyle Lowry, formerly of the Miami Heat, he finished tied for 53rd too. And also, remember when Matthew Tkachuk went on the NBA on TNT right prior to the Heat's Eastern Conference final game against the Boston Celtics 2 years ago? Well, Charles Barkley was also part of that same competition too, and he was tied for 58. So now it's another reason for Matthew Tkachuk, if he ever sees Charles Barkley again, which Charles Barkley, that man endorses the sport of hockey. He loves the sport. He gets so excited, and he's even on the ESPN broadcast, which congratulations to Charles Barkley. After this year, he's going to be retiring from broadcasting too. So, hey, maybe he can improve his swing since he won't be on TV as much. And also never forget when COVID first arrived, was a part of our reality. The match between Tiger and Phil, Charles Barkley was also part of that broadcast. And honestly, not because of skill or analysis, but for entertainment purposes only. That's the only reason he would ever be on a broadcast for golf. Jerry Rice was also there, the greatest wide receiver of all time, tied for 64th. Alex Rodriguez, owner of the Minnesota Timberwolves and an analyst on MLB on Fox, finished 88th in that. He also competed in that tournament right before covering the All-Star game, the MLB All-Star game in Arlington, Texas, too. And also other guys who have been there, not necessarily athletes, but actors. So what some of them, Ray Romano from Everybody Loves Raymond, and also from Ice Age. That's a big part of what I remember Ray Romano as, and Larry the Cable Guy, another guy, no pun intended, who was part of this. And I also got to see Larry the Cable Guy in person when he was doing a celebrity golf tournament in Disney. So Larry the Cable Guy has competed in multiple celebrity golf tournaments too. So that's another thing for him. So definitely not the last one we will see out of him. And also, to wrap it all up for Matthew Tkachuk, posting a picture on his Instagram just a few hours before hitting record of him waking up with the Stanley Cup in his bed in St. Louis. So congratulations to Matthew Tkachuk getting his day with the cup and celebrating it with all of his loved ones. And then the weekend before being a part of the American Century Championship out in Lake Tahoe. But we are going to transition over to segment number 2, where we are going to discuss more about contract values around the NHL and where the Florida Panthers stand in regard to that. We are going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed, and we are at the search for hiring for better. When it comes to your hiring, the best way to search for candidates isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to the other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million app qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners to this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your job more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Right now, go there right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. And I want to thank you guys once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Day brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a few things I wanted to mention too with this is that the keeper of the cup, Phil Pritchard, also posted a picture of Anthony Stolarz with the cup behind a body of water, and assuming that Sonny Meta just celebrated his day with the cup in New Jersey, I assume that they wanted to kill two birds with one stone and get Anthony Stolarz his day with the cup too, all in that. But we don't have any details of Stolarz's day with the cup, and once we find out, we will discuss that more here on the podcast. And George Richards of Florida Hockey Now also put out an article saying that Montour's day with the Stanley Cup will be coming up too. So we will discuss that on the show when we know the details. But let's go discuss what the segment is about, what we teased prior to it, and it's the contract values of multiple Panthers. There's 3 to be exact, on where they stand in the NHL. And last year we were discussing this, and it's mostly comparing last year to this year on the best contracts in the NHL. Last year, the best contract in the NHL was considered Matthew Tkachuk, a big part of the Florida Panthers bringing the team to the Stanley Cup final, 40 goal scorer, 4 game-winning goals in the 2023 postseason. At the time last year, he was considered the best contract in the NHL. But coming into this year, obviously the goal production is down. The defense has definitely gone up, and still very, very impactful as far as the grit that comes with him being there with board battles, being that presence behind the net, and for him. And this year he comes in at number 6 as the 6th best contract in the NHL, making an annual average value of 9.5, but his projected value, according to Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic, has him at 14.1. million for his value. And like, and it comes a lot with the system that the Florida Panthers play here. And that's going to come with production going down too. But it doesn't mean that his contract is less valuable than what it is. The great thing about this is after this year, you still have 6 more years of Matthew Tkachuk under it. And just like looking at Sam Reinhart, you see 57 goals for him. Even if he goes back to the mean, you're looking at somewhere between 30 to 40 goals a season that you're averaging out. For Matthew Tkachuk, if he's playing a full 82 game season, you're seeing somewhere between 25 and 40 for him. And Matthew Tkachuk doesn't need to be the main goal scorer on the team. I mean, the Panthers have so many shooters around them too. But Matthew Tkachuk comes at 6 this year. With we mentioned Gustav Forsling just a few seconds ago. Gustav Forsling is the guy who comes in at number 1 for the entirety of the NHL in the best contract value. And the fact that this contract was given right before the Panthers playoff run, right at the time of the trade deadline too, approaching 5.8 that he's making going into this season, year 1 of this deal. Prior and projected value based on shutting down the top stars, Nikita Kucherov, David Pastrnak, Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, and then the likes of Connor McDavid, Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl. To that, his projected value is 11.4. So, if I'm doing the math correctly, just under $6 million more of that he's producing versus what he is making there. And the guy who can move the puck easily out of his zone, get back, stop on a dime, and control his gaps really well. And that's the thing about Gustav Forsling. And then getting this at $5.75 million, you're paying second pair defenseman money for a guy to play top pair. And who knows? And like we spoke about multiple times here on the show, is for him getting that value here, and also the fact that he has an opportunity to possibly be that quarterback on the power play. His value can skyrocket even more, that he could be number 1 on this list even come next year too. Obviously, it's also going to depend on how far the Panthers go, and that's a lot of how these lists go too. For the Panthers, it's a lot about projecting the future, the now, and everything. And also, Sam Reinhart is on this list too. We mentioned the 57 goals, regressing back to the mean. But for Rhino, the fact that he is value, if he hit the open market, we're saying that he would be in the likes of $11-12 million of over 7 years, because if you sign somewhere else, you don't get that 8th year too. So, and also if you don't sign before the deadline of when free agency opens, you risk losing that 8th year. So the fact that the Florida Panthers and Sam Reinhart got that done right before free agency even open makes it even so much more valuable. And his projected value from 8.6, according to Dom Luszczyszyn's model, has him at 11.6 too in this exercise that we looked at too. So a lot of the value contracts are the same that are on this list from this year and last year. Some of them include Jack Hughes of the New Jersey Devils, Miro Heiskanen of the Dallas Stars, Adam Fox, even though he didn't really look like himself in the Eastern Conference Final, and Matthew Boldy. Matthew Boldy didn't even play a whole 82 game season right before getting his extension, and that is paying off so well for Bill Guerin. Him and Kirill Kaprizov, neither of them played a full 82 game season. Some of the worst contracts on this list, Jonathan Huberdeau and Darnell Nurse are some of the top ones. Jonathan Huberdeau last season, going into this one, was the 3rd worst, and you were thinking maybe that was just a one-off season with last season of Darryl Sutter, and then Ryan Huska comes into the mix. Also, new GM and Craig Conroy there, and now he's considered the 1st based on how much of a drop in point production there, and also drop in role minutes, you name it. Darnell Nurse, it's emphasized for him that there's of the contract with, we mentioned Gustav Forsling getting paid second pair defense money to play first. It's the opposite for Darnell Nurse, and especially with the emergence of Evan Bouchard, who's going to be an RFA, and then Matthias Ekholm, a veteran who's been around for a while, and then that becoming that solid pair. It's that contract for Darnell Nurse that doesn't look any better. And the fact that for Edmonton, it's really hard to get out of that. But I'm also very impressed by Edmonton's offseason, despite not a lot of space of guys wanting to come back and for cheap too. Corey Perry coming back into the mix. Matthias Janmark too. Adam Henrique. The only guy they lost, big loss they had this season was Warren Fogle, who went to the Los Angeles Kings in free agency. But names that were on for both years there: Darnell Nurse, Colton Parayko, Seth Jones, Tyler Seguin, and two Montreal Canadiens in Brandon Gallagher and Josh Anderson, which now with the youth movement in Montreal, with paying Slavkovsky, Caulfield, and Suzuki are under contract. This next transition with getting David Reinbacher into the mix, and even Ivan Danilov, who they just drafted out of Russia. Once those contracts come expire, and also with the youth movement coming around, I'm very high on Montreal's future too. And also, you know who's not up there on this list on either year? Sergei Bobrovsky and Aaron Ekblad. Neither of them are on the list. Prior to the 2023 best or worst contracts, Sergei Bobrovsky had just come off carrying basically the Florida Panthers on that 2023 playoff run. Him and Matthew Tkachuk were the guys carrying them. And now it's crazy how much narratives in this too have a lot to do with it. And now everyone's talking about, even if the Panthers didn't win the Stanley Cup, a lot of the conversation of Bob was about the fact that he carried the Panthers all the way to at least the Stanley Cup final. That contract all in itself is all but worth it. And thankfully, the Panthers were able to double down on that by actually clinching it. And for Ekblad, getting his contract done at the time that it was, just a year before his ELC was done, and getting that value there, although the injuries, you don't have a single defenseman who's making over 9. So imagine if Ekblad took a bridge and then you paid him after that. So that would be a little bit of a heavier anchor for Bill Zito and company. And even this offseason, think about that, where it might even be you might have to give Anton Lundell a bridge deal this year had you paid Ekblad a bridge deal then. So it's crazy the different ripple effects that, even though it wasn't the current Panthers management, it was Tom Rowe who paid him at the time. Crazy to think how that can have effects later on in your life cycle of trying to contend and building a core around, which once Mackie Samoskevich gets to becoming an RFA, if he is as good as we think he is going to be, you're going to have to bridge him to at least get some cap space and at least see some light at the end of the tunnel when you're looking to reset things here to still buy in free agency and even at the trade deadline. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss more about the way too early awards and how they compare and how we compare this year to last year. We're going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Third and final segment here on this Thursday, July 18th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Thursday. So some of the Athletic released another article discussing the way too early awards and where each team will finish in the Stanley Cup playoffs, awards, you name it. But some of the votes had the Panthers not even in the top 8 to repeat as champions. There are voted in the top 10 of most likely team to finish as the runner-up. And also, when it comes to GMs, front offices, and then even the outside of how you construct your team. But we also don't consider the fact that how hard it was to construct rosters, especially if you are buying with the flat cap that happened for 3 seasons, with with the NHL, and it's crazy to see the firings that have happened at a high rate in the last few years, because just the one to just stand out as first coach to be fired, Derek Lalonde of the Detroit Red Wings. I don't think I don't know what to make of them. That's the thing. Which everyone talks about Steve Yzerman, the Yzer plan, and now everything looks to be a little bit of a halt. Yeah, you re-signed Patrick Kane, brought in Vladimir Tarasenko to the mix, which they reunited from New York, but you got rid of Jake Wallman in a trade too, who him and Mort Seider were a pretty great pair there in Detroit there for a few years too. So, and crazy to think, Paul Maurice was hired by the Florida Panthers just over 2 years ago, and he's currently the 10th longest tenured coach with his current team. Last year, with the first coach to be fired, of the 8 names listed as the top coaches to be first fired, 7 of them got fired. The only one who was left standing there was John Tortorella of the Philadelphia Flyers. So some of the names that were there. Top one was DJ Smith, which Ottawa had a whole bunch of expectations. Craig Berube, who's now with the Maple Leafs. Rick Bowness, who left due to health reasons and also him retiring. Sheldon Keefe, it was the final nail in the coffin for Toronto and what they're trying to build. David Quinn was part of a rebuild that is not his fault. He's honestly, for him, I feel bad for him because I didn't feel that he deserved to be fired from the New York Rangers then. So, and then going to this job where it's not the best situation for him. Dean Evison was also one of them, and Lane Lambert of the New York Islanders. So that was last year's list. So this year's list has Derek Lalonde there as some of the first coaches to be fired. So it's for dark horse teams. This year it's Tampa Bay, which honestly, maybe they got better. I know you lose your captain in Steven Stamkos there, but you get a little younger with Jake Gensel. You create a little bit of space there with some trades, and you bring back a leader in Ryan McDonough. But I know plus minus isn't the be all end all, and I know he had 40 goals, but that speaks a lot of volumes if your plus minus is that much in a certain direction. If it's close to 0, I don't make too much of it. Anywhere between minus 10 and plus 10, I'm not gonna put too much stock into it. But when it's skewed so much in one direction, that says something about the fall in play. Biggest disappointment going into this season, a lot of people are looking at the Carolina Hurricanes based on everything they lost. And even though Kuznetsov, they get cap relief from him, they still have to try to find a way to pay Marty Necas, Seth Jarvis, and maybe even make a trade, cap clearing trade to even try to keep them too, as both of them are RFAs this season. But dark horse this year we said was Tampa Bay. Last year was the Los Angeles Kings. As you know, when you and feel bad for them a little bit, where a division dominated by Edmonton and Vegas, it's really hard to get through. I kind of relate it as a Dolphins fan, being in the same division as the New England Patriots. You're trying to build, but you have that one unstoppable force that is consistently that nobody can get in their way too. So that is really the story of the LA Kings. But most likely to surprise, and I don't. It wouldn't be a surprise for me personally. The Utah Hockey Club, with everything that they drafted son of Jarome Iginla, Tija Iginla there into the mix too. Brought Sergachev, John Marino there. So honestly, and now they have an owner who wants to spend. So that's another thing. Going back to biggest disappointments, Florida is up there for biggest disappointments going into this season. And I can't blame the voters who are putting the Florida Panthers up there due to everything they lost. And maybe disappointment is a little bit of a harsh word going into this season, but this is why I haven't made any predictions of how I think the Florida Panthers are going to fare going into next season, because I want to see at least 5 to 10 games before I could really be sure about where I think the Panthers will be. Last year and this year for Vezina, Sergei Bobrovsky wasn't on the list last year, and he's not on the list this year. And with goaltending being so voodoo, even though he carried the Florida Panthers being to the final in 2023, with goalies in their mid 30s, it's not it's not a safe pick to gamble even on his chances to win the Vezina, even though he did finish third in the voting this year. Both years for Norris, it was Cale Makar. Selke, Alexander Barkov, he's going to be expected to be part of it and to win it every single year as basically it's the reputation award. Jack Adams, Sheldon Keefe is up there for Jack Adams' consideration as the guy most likely to win it. As new situation for him, young team. Dougie Hamilton, once he got injured last year, was really the injury that really hurt the New Jersey Devils the most this year too. So that's for New Jersey. Last year, for the Devils, 100% of the voters had to make the playoffs. Yikes! So so take these votings and way too early predictions with a grain of salt too. They do have the 100% of the voters in this for this article have the Panthers at 100% to at least make the postseason. Detroit is inside the top 8. Like I said, I'm not high on the Detroit Red Wings necessarily. Philadelphia is at 0%, where, in my opinion, this is probably their real tank year. Buffalo, once again, is outside of it, but it's a wait and see, as it's been hard to attract free agents to Buffalo with the lack of success, insane cold in Buffalo, and high taxes in Western New York too. Well, New York in general with the high taxes, but with the cold and the combination of that, it makes it a hard place to attract free agents and guys who want to be there. Western Conference field, they have Nashville. 93% of the voters have them making it into the playoff field. With Winnipeg, 75% have them in the postseason. They had a really great season last year, but big disappointment in the postseason is really they overwhelmed Connor Hellebuyck, and there's really not a lot that he could do when he can't see shots, and the eyes were taken away from Hellebuyck in this during the postseason. I remember that crazy 7-6 game one between them, just for Winnipeg. And there's also drama between whether they're going to trade Nikolai Ehlers or not. Rutger McGorty is not. There's uncertainty about his future too there. So those are more questions for the Winnipeg Jets there, as they are trying to maybe take that next step. As like we spoke about, for Buffalo, it's hard for them to attract guys. Winnipeg is the same thing, but also for them, if you with the lack of population, and for them, it's harder for them to go into tank mode too, as attendance has suffered even with them winning, and the lack of corporate sponsorships. That market is a little bit stuck in what to do at times for going for it, be in the middle, but it doesn't look that tanking is an option for that market too. It's really got to be a build. Also, last year for Western Conference playoff field, 16% had the Canucks in, and they ended up making the postseason too. So you never know what's going to come about with this season, and we could judge so much of guys of teams on paper too, but we never know until once the games are played. And one last thing before we get out of here is the Jim Gregory Award for the NHL, and the vote has Barry Trotz as the top guy to bring home the Jim Gregory. But let's also not forget that the voting for the Jim Gregory Award takes place after the second round of the playoffs. So when it comes to the additions that Nashville made in Jonathan Marchessault, Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, there's a lot of profile there for Nashville. But does it necessarily automatically turn into success? I mean, thankfully for them, they have some term there, so there's time for them to build into a Western Conference contender too. Bill Zito comes in at second, and honestly, he was a finalist 3 out of the last 4 years. So is him winning a Jim Gregory Award next year going to be kind of like Leonardo DiCaprio finally winning an Oscar? Who knows? So we will wait and see. But hey, Bill Zito is celebrating with a Stanley Cup. So he's all about Stanley Cups, not necessarily individual awards. So, hey, he's not necessarily angry about not winning the Jim Gregory Award. But that's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And make sure to check back later this week as we are going to continue our Stanley Cup coverage for the Summer of Champions. In the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.